Good evening and hello, YouTube. It's 7:15 here in Poland, and spring is finally starting to show its little face. We have some warmth and sunlight finally, so I hope you guys are having a great day wherever you are and that things are looking up. Yes, so Logan Silverwolf was first. He beat me into the chat. Well done. Just Janice, Artsy Fartsy, Philip, and Dr. Muta. Good to see you all. Thanks all for being here. So today we're going to be discussing Gnosticism. The reason it's important is that it is the first enemy of the church, of the early Christians, and also it has been a consistent major enemy for centuries. Welcome, Sergeant Grinch. And we need to understand how it has mutated and morphed and how it has presented itself as the ideology or the set of ideas, the thinking behind a number of corrupt theologies like Marxism, even Nazism. It is in the church. It has been soaking into the church and also affecting theology. It is a threat. We need to understand it historically, and then also we need to be able to refute the argument that it is the original, unaltered form of Christianity. Bod Ehrman likes to talk about there were many Christianities that were arguing out, and the Catholic Church took baseball bats, broke everyone's kneecaps, and they took over the church. Well, no, they couldn't have done that because the Gnostics came hundreds of years later. So yeah, okay. Well, let's dive in. So obviously I'll cover a little bit of a preview of some other things I'm working on and a brief recap. Right, I showed numerous of these graphs of these charts showing that this is one of the last ones, showing some of the later books, but all of the New Testament was quoted much longer, well, far earlier than the Gnostic texts are written. Right? So the entire New Testament was quoted centuries, hundreds of years, decades before the Gnostic texts even existed. Right? These are some of the later ones, but all of these texts, as I said, have quoted the New Testament. The New Testament was clearly around long before the Gnostic texts. Right? And then, of course, Dan Brown says these Gnostic texts are the unaltered Gospels. We know this is not true. There was something like 50 folios, something like 45 separate stories. Some of them were duplicates. Even the duplicates had differences. And these were multiple different competing mythical fantasies about the origins of Christianity, who Jesus was, completely incompatible sets of ideas. So therefore, it is not unaltered. It is not original because these are just a whole host of late fantasies. Right, then I spoke briefly of the Gospel of Thomas, which will come up again. And yeah, but let's talk to start off with the, before I dive into this though, but we're going to start with what happens when there are differences, if there are discrepancies with the eyewitnesses' accounts in the Gospels. Is that a bad thing? So that's something I want to talk about, but quickly, let me bring up two other things that I'm busy working on. And yeah, this. Right, I put up these two polls recently. This one I could have made a quiz, and I wanted to make it a poll instead. Yeah, so simply because there was a poll on Twitter, you can't make a quiz. But according to James 2:24, which is the only place in the Bible where you have the words faith alone, they are preceded by not. So we become justified, or we are saved, but not by faith alone. He says we are saved by works and not by faith alone. That is literally the only place where the words faith and alone appear in the Bible, right? And of course, so 14% of people have not actually read the Bible and don't like what it actually physically says on the page. I did show yesterday that Martin Luther explicitly states the word sola is not in the Bible. He realizes it is not in the Bible. He put it there at his own choice. He put it in there deliberately because he felt that once he added this word, it provided the correct sense. In other words, I'm just going to change the Bible, put in the words that I want to make it say what I want it to say. So we have Martin Luther's own admission. Of course, the fallback position on that is, well, we don't believe Martin Luther, we believe in the Bible, except you are following in the tradition, repeating the same lines, repeating the same excuses that Martin Luther brought to the world, oddly enough. So yes, you actually do believe in Martin Luther. You're repeating his theology. You're repeating his words. You're repeating his arguments. At the end of Revelation, John says, anyone who adds or detracts from the Bible shall be cursed. Now that is true. He does say that. Let me actually, yeah. So while we're on that, since you brought up Revelation, let me bring this up. So since Artifati says at the end of Revelation, John says, anyone who adds or detracts from the Bible shall be cursed. And that is true. And Ryan says, I hope you're doing well. I was wondering whether you would have considered the parallels between Manichaeism and Islam. And if so, could you direct me to some sources? Not offhand, not now. I'm not going to do that now. But you can find Manichaean parallels with multiple different heresies like the Cathars, the Albigenses, and even Martin Luther, who all seem to subscribe in some shape, manner, or form to Manichaeism. So let's briefly talk about Martin Luther and the Book of Revelation, since that just came up. Martin Luther writes, and this is in Martin Luther's Works, volume 35, Word and Sacrament 1, about the Book of Revelation of John. I leave everyone free to hold his own opinions. So in other words, he allowed for subjective interpretation, private interpretation. I would not have anyone bound to my opinion or judgment. I say what I feel. And he says, I miss more than one thing in this book. In other words, this book of the Bible is lacking. There are things that I think should be in here that are not in here. And he says, it makes me consider it to be neither apostolic nor prophetic. So Martin Luther says the book of John, the book of the Revelation of John, is not apostolic. An apostle did not write it. It is not prophetic. In other words, this book is in the Bible by mistake. First and foremost, the apostles do not deal with visions, but prophecy in clear and plain words. So in other words, John could not have been an apostle. This book could not have been the book of an apostle. It's dealing with the wrong topic. You see, so it's in the Bible. So therefore, you must understand, Martin Luther felt that the canon of the Bible was not closed. The canon of the Bible was subject to alteration and editing. He felt he had the right to edit the Bible on his own criteria, which is what arch heretics like Marcion did. And he says, but prophecy in clear and plain words, as do Peter and Paul and Christ in the gospel. It befits the apostolic office to speak clearly of Christ and his deeds, without images and without visions. Like, what the heck is John thinking? Well, what the hell is this going on here? Moreover, there's no prophet in the Old Testament, to say nothing of the New, who deals so exclusively with visions and images. So this cannot be apostolic. It is not prophetic. And Martin Luther says, for myself, I think it approximates the fourth book of Esdras. I can in no way detect that the Holy Spirit produced it. So Martin Luther says this book is not a product of the Holy Spirit. What the heck is it doing in the Bible? So this is Martin Luther, obviously, sola scriptura. Scripture alone, Scripture is holy, except this book is, what the heck is this book? Take it out of the Bible, please. Don't like that book either. Get that book out of the Bible. That sentence is wrong. Let me change that. Those books are, that's a mistake. Get rid of that book. So Martin Luther only wanted to remove like 30% of the Bible because it was wrong, because the Bible is holy and sacred and we cannot change it. So that's called hypocrisy. And Martin Luther says, let everyone think of it as his own spirit leads him. So if you're a Protestant and you feel that, that's a crappy book, I don't agree with that. I think that's just a comic book. I think that's a kid's fairy tale. He's saying that's fine. Let your own spirit lead you to whatever opinion you like. And my spirit cannot accommodate itself to this book. For me, this is reason enough not to think highly of it. So this is not a book produced by the Holy Spirit. I have no idea what the heck it's doing in the Bible. I don't think much of it. So do you think that is in keeping with sola scriptura, or is that just sheer hypocrisy from the chief hypocrite, Dr. Martin Luther? Yes, Artie Farty. Sounds like something the devil would say. And only Martin Luther is allowed to have prophetic visions. And Mr. Rock says, interestingly, Irenaeus, I believe, said the exact opposite. Said that despite not knowing its meaning, he trusted the authority of the church to keep it in. Subjectivism. No, Dr. Muta, that is correct. That's 100% correct. Martin Luther was a subjectivist. I mean, he states it as such. I've already covered some of that. And, and that's probably why John wrote that last part down. Exactly. So yes, Luther's opinion trumps the canon, Dr. Jonathan Gemmell. That is a fact. He felt his opinion. He wanted to get rid of about 30% of the Bible. His followers eventually did. So that's exactly what happened. But understand, Martin Luther had a very low opinion. I mean, you got to see his opinion in the book of James, right? In fact, in his Table Talks, number 5443, it actually opens with the title, Luther has low opinion of Epistle James, and it's pretty intense. Okay, then on top of that, so let me get back to where I was. Then, so I've mentioned that already, and then also I added this question: was it Protestant, Lutheran bishops and theologians, or Catholics who supported Nazism and wrote a new version of the New Testament with Jewish references removed, denying that Jesus was a Jew during the Nazi era to align Christianity with Nazi ideology and purify the Bible of any Jewishness? Well, so I've asked the question here. I decided not to make it a quiz with a right and wrong answer, but a poll. So Protestants and Lutherans. So the Protestants, now there's the common myth of Hitler's Pope, which is a lie. It's completely false. That's a completely false polemic. The Protestant church, theologians, priests, deacons in the thousands, in the hundreds of thousands, enthusiastically supported the Nazis. And they even were willing to rewrite the Gospels, to alter the Gospels to align with Nazi principles. This is something the Protestants did. Protestant priests, Protestant theologians, highly educated Lutheran Protestants decided, well, yes, we need to change the Bible because Nazism is the new Christianity. And yes, Mr. Rock, I've already done the electoral map of 1933 Germany. Yes. Yes. So yes, you are predestined, Sergeant Grinch, to blame Luther and Calvin for modern heresy. Yes. Okay, so understand. So I want to briefly go through some of the material I will cover. What I want to do is a talk again in the near future, continuing the talks on Martin Luther, but this time I'm going to move towards World War II. So we're going to go from Martin Luther's era to Nazi Germany, 1933 to 1943. So we're going to go to that period, and we're going to be talking in the near future about the Protestants and Martin Luther in Nazi Germany. So I'll give you just 5 of the early first quotes that I just bring your attention to. The De-Judaization of the religious life as the task of German theology and church. So that's mentioned by Walter Grundmann. So the German church and German theology must remove all Jewishness from the Bible. And he said that this task, and this is a Lutheran pastor, this is a trained Lutheran theologian, a priest, and he says the whole point of the German church and German theology is very similar to the Reformation. Protestants had to overcome Judaism just as Luther had overcome Catholicism. So it was important that the Germans continue in the Reformation tradition by getting rid of Judaism. The Bible would have to be purified, Grundmann continued, restored to its pristine condition before all that Jewish nonsense came into the Bible, to proclaim the truth about Jesus, that he sought the destruction of Judaism. So Jesus wanted the destruction. Jesus was at war with the Jews and at war with Judaism, and of course the Jews killed him. So the German Protestants, the German Lutherans, they were continuing this fight of Jesus against the Jews, and they were going to wipe out the Jews the way that Jesus wanted. So the German Christian movement, the pro-Nazi faction within the German Protestant church, claimed a membership of 600,000 pastors, bishops, professors of theology, religion teachers, and laity. And of course they said that this whole new movement would exemplify the Nazified Christianity that it advocated. And of course here you can see the, this would look good in your parish church, don't you think? What do you think, guys? Do you think this would be a good, some of these little crossy thingies here, these hook crosses, the Hakenkreuz. Don't you think these would look great in your local parish? I mean, what do you think? Put a couple up on the sides, put one on the door as you come in, as you walk down the aisle. You've got one hanging underneath Jesus, or maybe on top of him. What do you think? Or maybe hang one as a scarf around him on the, on the statue. What do you guys think? This is German Protestant Christianity. So yeah, why is the cross there? Because Jesus was not a Jew, and he hated the Jews, and that's what the Protestants. Yeah, you work it out. So, how does the New Testament make any sense without being linked to the Old Testament? Stop asking sensible questions, Wally. And a hacked cross, exactly. It's called a Hakenkreuz, the hooked cross. Okay, so enough of that. So I will discuss this probably next week. I'll start getting into World War II history, or just pre-World War II, how the Lutherans saw Luther, how the Nazis saw Luther, and how they saw Christianity, the Nazified Christianity of pre-World War II. We'll have a look at that sort of 1933 to 1943. We'll have a look at that era, and we'll see that the myth of Hitler's Pope is projection. This is purely projection because we will discover that the Lutheran Church, the Protestants, the Germans were deep, deep into Nazism. And of course, they had to project their failures onto the Catholics. Okay, let me close that and let's dive into this talk. So I hope that was illustrative. Hopefully that was helpful to provide some perspective on what's happening. So let's talk about this topic. The Da Vinci Code, of course, suggests that the New Testament contains disagreements about Jesus. And this is the same claim that people like Bart Ehrman make. Because there's disagreements about Jesus. And look at these Gnostic texts that come 200 years later. Yeah, we can ignore those Gnostic texts from 200 years later. And of course, because there are disagreements, there is doubt about its authenticity, doubts about its accuracy. So the New Testament is false because they're not copy-paste plagiarisms of each other. So this creates a false belief that the Gnostic Gospels present a coherent story about Jesus without these perceived problems, but that is entirely false. The Gnostic Gospels contain a riot of myths and fantasies, not one of them substantiated by any kind of historical basis or any archaeology whatsoever. So it is implied that the New Testament Gospels are flawed due to their disagreements. However, disagreement does not mean error in sources describing the life and teachings of Jesus. So to illustrate, let's say we take an event like 9/11, right? Very controversial event. And no, I'm not interested in your 9/11 conspiracy theories right now. Comparing accounts of a major event like 9/11, different newspapers have different reports that do not agree word for word. Different journalists will highlight different aspects of the day, of the event. They'll use different words. They'll have eyewitnesses from different points of view, eyewitnesses relating different perspectives. Not just physical points of view, but different ideas, different points of interest. Someone might look at the suffering mother. Someone might look at the soldiers. Someone might be looking at the crowd. So you're going to have these different views that do not necessarily 100% line up. So the differences in reports do not necessarily mean that any of the versions are wrong. Journalists write from their own perspective and select information based on their expertise and also the available space in the publication. In the ancient world, writing materials were not as readily available as today. So it was crucial to preserve and write information down and get the critical information down. But also you couldn't write everything. You didn't have access to paper and pen like we have today. So paper was not easily found, and mistakes in writing are also not easily rectified. So keep that in mind. You couldn't casually just Tipp-Ex something out or erase it or retype it. Making parchment and papyrus was very time-consuming. It required resources like animal skins and lots of money, and it took months. The scarcity of writing materials will have influenced the way information was recorded and preserved in ancient texts. So the limited availability of writing materials contrasts heavily with the abundance of writing materials, paper, and printing today. Very good point, heretics says. Actually, very, very good point. I'll highlight that quickly. Nor were they interested in a dry recapitulation of events without a theme or meaning. And that's a fair point as well. There's a perspective there. So differences are perfectly normal. So let's take an academic setting. Multiple students turn in papers, turn in an exam, whatever the case is, and they are word for word identical. Now, if the Gospels were word for word identical, people would be screaming falsehood, plagiarism. Now the fact that they are similar but not word for word identical, everyone's going falsehood, plagiarism. You plagiarized it from Sol Invictus. These first century documents are plagiarized from stories of Sol Invictus. When was Sol Invictus around? 274 AD. Yes, you're plagiarizing stories that came 210 years later. Because you plagiarists, you. So we would then view this similarity, great similarity, would be seen as evidence of plagiarism or collusion. Similarly, the Gospels in the New Testament do not agree word for word. So this lack of agreement is actually seen as a positive aspect. Exact agreement in the Gospels would suggest collusion or an effort to create a narrative, a consistent narrative, but the presence of differing perspectives and details actually gives some level of credibility to their authenticity. The Gospels in the New Testament were full of Philip. Don't forget, these Gnostics came hundreds of years later. So these Gnostics had hundreds of years to write their own Gospels. So the Gospels in the New Testament exhibit both similarities and differences, which can be attributed to factors such as the intended audience, the personalities of the authors, and the relationships between them. So the authors of the Gospels very likely knew each other, and they had some level of interaction, which would explain the similarities in the accounts. At the same time, each Gospel writer has their own individual perspective and their own sources. So there's independent work and unique details in each account. So the combination of shared knowledge, independent viewpoints, just reflects normal circumstances and practices in which these were written. So that's from an academic point of view, an academic summary of why there would be differences within the New Testament. So now, short summary and some recommended books that would be useful. So Michael Heiser recommends Craig L. Blomberg, The Historical Reliability of the Gospels, and he talks about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, as well as John, but it sort of emphasizes these three. He has a companion volume on John's Gospel. He says not light reading, but would be very useful as a reference. He really references David Allen Black, and he says, why 4 Gospels? And he says Black tries to write for the lay audience. You might find that useful. He then says David Allen Black, rethinking the synoptic problem, the synoptic Gospels, and the claim that the Gnostic Gospels are older, more consistent, more reliable, and unaltered compared to the New Testament Gospels is not supported by historical evidence. It's just a big fat lie. Understand, it's purely just a big fat lie. The dates of the Gnostic Gospels are all later than the New Testament Gospels, and there is evidence of earlier sources quoting from the New Testament. Now, the author, Dumb Brown, who makes these claims in his book, The Da Vinci Clown, probably did so for sensationalism, or he wants to sell a book, and for commercial reasons rather than historical accuracy, or he's a rabid Gnostic. It's also called fiction for a reason. Now, some scholars and some authors, such as Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, Henry Lincoln, and Picknett and Prince, present pseudo-scholarship. Now, while remaining polite, he's not exactly kind, right? Michael Heiser is not kind to these scholars. He basically calls them charlatans. And he says these people are presenting pseudo-scholarship in their non-fiction works. They're presenting obvious nonsense. So these individuals may be accused of not providing accurate or incomplete information in their writings, which misleads readers and contributes to misinformation. So he just calls them people who apply fiction, basically. It is essential authors and scholars must uphold scholarly standards and provide reliable sources and evidence to support their claims in non-fiction works. Right, pseudo-scholarship, and back to the Gospel of Thomas. Scholars and authors who engage in pseudo-scholarship either lack necessary knowledge and credentials to write accurately, or they intentionally leave out key information. Now, because they want to push a specific agenda. Now, you've noticed that I have been providing very detailed information on Martin Luther. I've been very careful in what I'm quoting and my sources. I've provided the documents, and I've shown you that all of these quotes that I'm giving are from the mouth of Martin Luther. And people are going, well, Lloyd, I don't agree with everything with all of the facts you've presented. It's like, well, you don't agree Martin Luther said that because it's in Martin Luther's books in his own handwriting. So let me know why you don't think Martin Luther wrote the thing that Martin Luther wrote. I've heard dumb arguments like that. So. Now, I've given you lots of key information. I've provided lots of additional details that were accidentally left out by numerous theologians and professors and others, historians, to fill in the blanks, right? Because they have an agenda. So by either not knowing or deliberately withholding facts, these individuals fail to meet scholarly standards and they lie to you, short version. So in the Gospel of Thomas, right, in the case of Gospel of Thomas being an exception chronologically, so the Gospel of Thomas may be late 1st century, early 2nd century. So it might be sort of roughly contemporaneous with the Gospel of John, sort of very late 1st century. So thoroughly evaluate the arguments presented and consider the credibility of sources being used to support any claims made about this text. We did mention that no one from the early fathers quotes the Gospel of John. It's not in the Diatessaron. It's not in any other source. So clearly it was never regarded as canonical. It was never regarded as authentic. Protestant believer says, so John had major details that weren't included in Mark, but Mark would touch on the subject. Yes, so yeah. Now, the Gospel of Thomas is unique among the Gnostic Gospels because it's the only one for which there is Greek material available, except it's in pieces, it's in scraps. So the other Gnostic Gospels are known through Coptic translations of older Greek originals. No extant Greek manuscripts have been discovered. So the fragmentary Greek material for the Gospel of Thomas provides some insight into its possible origins. And we saw it was Eastern Syriac. It would have come from that part of the world. But the dating of these scraps is challenging due to the limited amount of material. So the dating of the Gospel of Thomas may be as early as 50 AD, although the scholarship now leans towards sort of 90-100. This could suggest that it could be contemporary with the canonical Gospels, but this is still a matter of debate. It would seem to be sort of roughly around the year 100. Briefly, the Gospel of Thomas. So known from a collection of fragments, right? These are papyrus manuscripts written in Coptic, not Greek. They were discovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt. The majority of the text is preserved, but there are literal gaps and missing portions in the manuscript, right? It is more accurate to say that the Gospel of Thomas is available in pieces or fragmentary form rather than complete. So the Gospel of Thomas is known from two main sources, a highly fragmentary version in Greek and an almost complete copy in Coptic. The Coptic version is more complete, but contains gaps and missing portions. So it is called a fragmentary. So it's a fragmentary document. It does not contain references to the story of Jesus, his birth, life, death, or resurrection. Instead, it is a collection of 114 sayings. So it's almost like the book of Ecclesiastes, just a series of sayings called logia that are attributed to Jesus. So prior to its association with Gnosticism, the Gospel of Thomas was not viewed as a typical gospel because it's not a narrative history. As I said, it's a group of like aphorisms. So the collection of sayings attributed to Jesus is similar to the book of Proverbs in structure. Dr. Jonathan Gavin says, Luther said it. Question, Luther said it. Answer, but he can't have said it. That isn't the Luther I know. Yeah, so Martin Luther's lying. Yeah, it's when you quote Muhammad or quote Muhammad to Muslims. It's like, no, he never said that. That's a weak hadith. Yeah. So these logia are not narrative accounts, but individual teachings or aphorisms attributed to Jesus. So the association of the Gospel of Thomas with Gnosticism is due to thematic and conceptual similarities between some of the sayings in Thomas and the more extensive theological parchments found in the Gnostic text. So there seems to be some sort of thematic parallels between the other Nag Hammadi scrolls and what's in the Gospel of Thomas. So it reflects elements of later Gnostic thinking. It predates the development of full-fledged Gnosticism, and that was 2nd, 3rd century, right? As a distinct religious movement. So it represents a convergence of some ideas and some teachings. So the presence of Gnostic themes in the sayings of Thomas suggests there were already threads of Gnostic thought circulating in the early Christian community. We know, for instance, there was Simon the Samaritan, Simon Magus, Simon the Magician. We know already that some of these Gnostic ideas persisted then already, very, very early on. And of course, these ideas remained around for hundreds of years. So the followers of Simon Magus stayed around for hundreds of years, and they would simply just put on a new coat of paint and come back out the door under a fresh name, but it was the same ideas, just under a new hat. Right, so these ideas would later develop into the more cohesive Gnostic tradition. So it comes from roughly the year 100, and of course you've got your Gnostic Gospels in the 3rd and 4th century. So what are the Gnostic Gospels? A quick overview of this. I have this video on YouTube. You can check that as well. So the Nag Hammadi library. So the Gnostic Gospels are not scripture. Definitely not. Right? The Gnostic Gospels are 2nd to 4th century writings. They include things like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip. It's never the Gospel of Billy. It's never the Gospel of Cecil. It's never the Gospel of Jimmy, because they're of course trying to imply that they are Gospels of real apostles. They want to be the Gospels of, this guy that's famous, this guy who's a famous Christian. That's really the idea. So you've got a number of these different Gospels. They were known and they were condemned by the early church for being outside of accepted teaching. Just the Book of Grinch. Yeah, why would they call it the Book of Grinch? They're like, Grinch who? Star-Lord. Star-Lord who? That's the situation you'd be with. But you go, well, it's actually the Book of James. It's like, oh, James, the famous James. No, you can't be famous. Martin Luther doesn't like you. So now these books are not considered inspired scripture. Now there are 114 verses of the Gospel of Thomas, just like there's 114 surahs of the Quran. Now he mentions becoming like Jesus. In Logia 108, he says, Jesus said, "He who shall drink from my mouth shall become like me. I myself will become he, and the hidden thing shall be revealed to him." So in other words, this idea of drinking from the mouth or kissing on the mouth, you'll find that in the divine will. You'll find that it's a Gnostic concept, the kiss, the divine kiss, which actually transfers hidden knowledge, secret knowledge. And I myself will become he, so you will become God. You'll become God because you'll be filled with the secret knowledge, right? The hidden thing shall be revealed to him. So on Peter and Mary, on women, Logia 1:14, Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary go forth from among us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "Behold, I shall lead her, that I may make Mary male, in order that she also may become a living spirit like you males. For every woman who makes herself male shall enter into the kingdom of heaven." Yeah, so that's definitely, Jesus would have said that. I can see that. Now the Nag Hammadi library, these are some of the scrolls here you can see. The trans movement. Joel Thomas, yes. That's, of course, that I was implying that, and I think you understood. Yes. Now, the artsy fartsy, I don't want to be a male, and I'm so glad. So the Nag Hammadi library, okay, was discovered in 45, and it brought these gospels to public attention. So as a historical corpus, they offer obviously historical information. They have historical value. But they were written after the New Testament period, and they conflict with it, right? They're in contradiction with the New Testament, being alternative beliefs rejected by the early church. The already mentioned Gospels, among others, were published and in some cases popularly marketed as lost Gospels. What do these secret Gospels contain? Buy my book and find out, right? So, holes in the narrative. Now, there are holes in the narrative, and then there are also, as you can see, literal holes in the narrative. Now, scholars agree that these writings were not produced by the famous Christians to whom the titles attribute the works. Silvana Liveria, welcome. Romeo and Roseanne, Jim Brevara, welcome. Okay, Blue Dragon, hello there. I am Gnostic, but of Eastern type Buddhist base, not these silly fanfics. It's still fanfic, Blue Dragon. It's still silly fanfic. So now, nor were they written during the time period in which those figures lived. So they come much later. This is why Jesus was plagiarized from Sol Invictus, which was created in 274 AD. So yeah, I can see that happening. So the Gnostic Gospels were known during the time of their writing, and they were rejected, right? They were left outside of the study by most until they were rediscovered in the 20th century. We know of them through the writings of people like Saint Irenaeus in his Against Heresies, right? Here you've got page 1 of the Gospel of Judas. Now, a brief summary of the Gospel of Philip as an example. The rediscovered Gospel of Philip is Gnostic, written between the late 2nd to 4th century, origin unknown. The author was likely a Gnostic from that time period, offering an alternative perspective to the traditional teachings of the church. The church did not take the Gospel of Philip seriously. There is no early Greek copy. It popularized the idea of a marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. This is where, of course, Dan Brown gets his ideas from. This idea is not supported by any credible historical evidence. I've covered this already, and I will be covering it further. Now, the Gospel of Philip is not a missing gospel. It's a later alternative fan fiction, right? And it is promoted by people who want to create a Gnostic-influenced Christianity, their own private version of Christianity. So the date of the document's origin is generally unknown. It's a very wide range, and it focuses on the activity of the Gnostic leader Valentinus, who was in Rome from 138 to 158. So it's written after that period. Right? Scholars agree it was written no earlier than this time. It was likely written later, in the late 2nd or 3rd century, as a response to Valentinus' theological ideas and teachings. So these are great for fiction, like the Da Vinci Code, right? It is not written by Philip the disciple. It is not a biblical gospel. It is named after him because he is the only disciple mentioned in the text. It focuses on the sacrament of marriage as a sacred mystery. Don't forget, but the sacred kiss is the transfer of gnosis, right? It's mentioned in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Clown as evidence of Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene. The text does not state, and I've covered this in depth. I will probably do it again, but I have covered this a couple of times in depth. It doesn't. I've read the book. It was fun to read. But yeah, the text does not state that Jesus was married to Mary or even romantically involved. The section referring to their relationship is heavily damaged and implies nothing beyond a friendly relationship. You have to catch a bus, Dr. Jonathan? Well, we'll catch you later. So I won't go too long tonight on this one. The original, I'm only going to go to about page 75, so I'm not going to go too many slides tonight. The original writing of the Gospel of Philip is dated to the 3rd century at the earliest, right? Which is about 200 years after Jesus' death, right? So you're looking at 200 years, at least a century, if not 200 years after Jesus' death. So the value of studying the Gospel of Philip lies in understanding early pseudo-Christian heresies, or to enjoy fiction, of course. Now, of course, we can see, did Jesus marry? Right, so this is my video that I did on Did Jesus Marry in 2 parts. Did Jesus marry Mary Magdalene? I cover this in 2 parts, all right? Ignore the demented-looking guy over there and focus on the content. So have a look at that. Did Jesus marry Mary Magdalene? It's in 2 parts. I cover this in depth. I will repeat some of that data here because I'm going to add some more detail to it. Right, so briefly now, the Essenes versus the Cathars. So the Game of Thrones, what am I thinking? The Gospel of Thomas. It contains threads of Gnostic thought due to thematic similarities with later Gnostic texts, right? So if certain lines from the Dead Sea Scrolls are selectively quoted to a Gnostic scholar, these lines from the Dead Sea Scrolls might also sound Gnostic in nature, right? Because they are shared ideas, but we know that these books come much later. They were plagiarizing, they were cribbing Christian ideas, right? And that would be later expanded upon in Gnosticism. So the Gospel of Thomas is before Gnosticism was fully established as religion around the 3rd century-ish. You can find these themes and concepts in different religious and philosophical traditions, right? Even if they develop separately at different times. Now, the Essenes were a Jewish sect that existed, and we will discuss the Essenes in depth later. They existed before the New Testament era. Now, some scholars associate them with the community that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Essenes were known for an ascetic lifestyle, communal living, and esoteric teaching. Now, of course, many of these scholars want to claim that Jesus was one of the Essenes, and we'll talk about the evidence for that as well. Now, the Cathars, on the other hand, were a Christian sect that emerged in the Middle Ages. Now, I'm simply quoting the scholarship here. They were a Christian sect. No, they're not. They were flaming heretics. They were outright flaming Gnostic heretics. They were not Christian by any stretch of the imagination, right? So they were influenced by Gnostic ideas. So the Cathars did share some beliefs with Gnostic theology, such as dualism, right? That's, you have the good God, the bad God, and the rejection of the material world as evil, which goes against Genesis. The Essenes and the Cathars existed in different time periods. The Essenes were predating the New Testament era and the Dead Sea Scrolls, dating back to that time. The Cathars emerge centuries later, right? They draw on Gnostic ideas that have been circulating in various forms throughout history. Now, the major Gnostic influence here seems to be the Manichaean. Someone mentioned Manichaeism earlier, right? Early Mormonism, who knows, probably, but a lot of these ideas are Manichaean. Even Martin Luther's ideas harken back to 4th century Manichaeism. So, yeah, so these guys have all these crazy ideas. Now, here you've got Qumran. That's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Here's Jerusalem. Here's the Dead Sea. All right? The Dead Sea Scrolls, some dating to 300 BC and others to the 1st century AD, based on paleography and carbon-14 dating, were discovered at Qumran, just next to the Dead Sea, where the Essenes are believed to have lived. Right? It's believed that the Essenes produced what are known as the sectarian manuscripts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. These writings reflect the beliefs and practices of the Essene community, although they also collected what they call non-sectarian texts, like the Book of Enoch. And when we go through very early 1st century, late 1st century, early 2nd century Gnostic texts, or Sethian Gnostic texts, we'll discover the Book of Enoch is very, very important. So while the Essenes may not have written the Book of Enoch, it was in the Qumran library. Some sectarian manuscripts have thematic similarities with later Gnostic texts. So the Gnostics were familiar to some degree with these texts. It is not accurate to label Essenes as Gnostics, and some people do try to. as Gnosticism is a distinct religious movement with its own theology, and it did not emerge until the 2nd or 3rd century, and believed to have coalesced in the late 1st century AD among Jewish and early Christian groups. So the evidence for the development of Gnosticism as a separate religious movement comes from the discovery of the Gnostic Gospels. And these texts reflect a fully formed set of theological ideas, and of course we know these come 200-300 years after Christianity. Right. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls and Secret Codes. Now, this is Barbara Thiering, Jesus the Man, decoding the real story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the controversial bestseller that will change your view of Christianity forever. So you have popular writers like Bagent, Lee, Lincoln, Picknett, and Prince, who all have attempted to create connections between various groups such as the Essenes, the Gnostics, and the Freemasons. So to make these associations, they often disregard the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Of course, they've got to overlook the facts, because the facts would hurt their story. So Barbara Thiering challenges the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and she believes that they contain a secret, coded language that overlaps with the New Testament. Now, the majority of scholars do agree with the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls based on carbon-14 dating and, of course, analysis of the writing. So despite Thiering's claims, the DSS do not mention any New Testament characters. There is no evidence of a connection between the Essenes and later Gnostic or Masonic traditions. Right? Now, do some of your own research. Explore the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? To look at historical context. Don't always rely on interpretations or theories by scholars or popular writers. Do your own research. Try to spend time reading up a little bit. Thank you very, very much. I'm so grateful. Just get to that Crusader General. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you for that donation. It says, God has blessed you with great wisdom and courage, Brother Lloyd. Deus Vult. Thank you very much. And appreciate it. So let's continue. In their book, The Turin Shroud, How Da Vinci Fooled History, Prince and Picknett make the controversial claim that the face depicted on the famous Turin Shroud is not Jesus Christ as traditionally believed, but Leonardo da Vinci. Now, guys, I have news to share with you. As you know, Jesus was a Muslim. You also are aware that Jesus was a Palestinian. Jesus was also a Buddhist. Jesus was Attis of Phrygia. Jesus was Sol Invictus. Jesus was Dionysus. Jesus was Serapis. Jesus also didn't exist. And Jesus was also a Gnostic. Okay, so now you know he was also Leonardo da Vinci or something. So when people tell you Jesus was X, Y, or Z, just if they say Jesus was X, just tell them, no, Jesus was Buddhist. Everyone knows that. And then say, but Jesus was also Sol Invictus. Jesus was Dionysus. Jesus didn't exist. Jesus was a Gnostic. Jesus was invisible. Jesus was a phantom. Jesus was also Serapis. Jesus was also Thoth. He was Ra. Jesus was Egyptian. Jesus was Buddhist. Jesus also went to Japan. And so yeah, just say, look, I mean, sorry, if you can sort out like between all these stories, I'll get back to you, right? Yeah, he was Mithra as well. Exactly. Yes, he was Mithra. Oh yeah, I forgot about Mithra. You're right. Matthew says, yeah, I think it was Mithra too. So yeah, he was Elvis. Jesus was Elvis. You're right. And so yeah, I guess just throw that back, because look, I mean, seriously, you guys got to get into a ring and sort it out and figure out which one he was, because you can't all be right. So now, everyone jumped on the Da Vinci Code narrative, which suggests that Leonardo da Vinci played a significant role in historical events and mysteries. And this is linked to the idea of the Priory of Sion. Okay, this is very much linked. Again, if you go to my talk here, Did Jesus Marry Mary Magdalene? Then you're going to learn about the Priory of Sion. So just keep that in mind, okay? That's kind of a real group that kind of faded away, wasn't really hugely significant in this context. And of course, they took this and then they made a whole thing out of it. And it just turned into a really funny story if you watch it. Jesus was a Martian. I'm not sure that's part of the canon yet. Rick Filmmaker, I don't know if Jesus was a Martian. That's not part of the canon, but maybe there's a book out there. We need to have a look. Right, so now she speaks of, now let's talk about the two-tier Pesher encryption. So Barbara Thiering, she's an Australian scholar who disagrees with the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and she uses Gnostic methods to prove it. Okay, and of course you've got Otto Betz and Rainer Riesner, who eventually, these are two scholars who eventually like, enough is enough. This is nonsense. And they wrote a book called Jesus, Qumran, and the Vatican. And basically their whole point was to debunk all of the nonsense that people had been writing about Jesus and about. So anyway, just to debunk all these scholars who are making up all of these crazy stories. Truth Defenders. Truth Defenders, are you a Nazi supporting, Muhammad supporting Christian too? Because I know you hate Jews. I know you don't think Jesus was a Jew. That was the Nazi teaching. That is the Muslim teaching. So you are a Muslim Nazi Jew hating Christian, which of course Jesus would want, but sure, yeah. So anyway, that's Truth Defenders. He's a Nazi Christian or a Muslim Christian who hates Jews. So yeah. So now, Turing's theories suggest an overlap with the New Testament, even though no New Testament characters are mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is really, really interesting. And of course, look, this fool, this Truth Defenders, I mean, actually, we just call him outright liar. He's upset because of the information I put out about Martin Luther, and there's going to be blowback for the fact that I've detailed exactly how depraved and actually evil Martin Luther was, how self-serving, egotistical, narcissistic, violent, and hateful this man actually was, right? Not just from one quote or cherry-picking one thing, but going through detailed historical analysis and through his own works and showing this man was an evil man with an evil agenda and caused immense damage. So, of course, there are going to be, Lutheran Nazis, exactly, right, who are going to be very upset by this. So, right, so let's continue. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, available in English, contain no New Testament characters. Yes, I cherry-picked 500 quotes, Century Sense. I cherry-picked 500 quotes from the best academic scholarship I could find. I had to read through so much nonsense that, yeah. So Barbara Turing believes that the New Testament characters are encrypted. You see, the reason that you can't find them in the scrolls is that they're encrypted. It's in code. It's actually there, but you've got to read it while squinting with the sun in your eyes, and then you've got to poke yourself with a needle in the left cheek in the right chakra, and then of course you've got to mumble your own favorite mantra and smell your socks until you start to feel dizzy, and then you'll see the names appear between the lines in the code. Doing a headstand, yes, doing a headstand, exactly, while desperately needing to take a pee but not doing it, because that'll create the right frame and focus of mind. So she believes the New Testament characters are encrypted. They're not there. We can't find them. They must be encrypted. Yep. It's like when I take money and I go, hold on. It's hang on. My oh my! Look at this. It's $1 million Polish bill. It's $1 million bill. I know it says 20, but believe me, encrypted in there is $1 million bill. So give me my $1 million, you bigot. So yeah, that's how that works. Okay, so the book Jesus, Qumran, and the Vatican, written by two liberal scholars, is recommended on this subject in response to Bagent, Lee, and Lincoln, and it's a thorough dismantling of all these popular writings that were not part of the Scrolls team. They are New Testament and early Judaism scholars, not involved with the dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are independent scholars, not trying to defend their Dead Sea work. They're simply going, hey, look, this is nonsense. Someone said something earlier. I missed a comment. Someone said, thank you for teaching your flock this important information. Rick Filmmaker, you're welcome. Thank you. He's manifesting in Lloyd's channel now too. Yes, he is, isn't he just? Yeah. So, let me see. Only an opinion. Jesus might have existed, but wasn't who they said to us. Well, everyone has an opinion, right? Now, why would you want to, why don't you tell us your favorite theory? Then we can put it on the stack with theory number 937 from just the last 1 year alone. Jesus was also from Sirius. Yes, very likely. Yeah. So let me see. Now, let's continue. So there's a link here. Okay, so yeah. Let me see. Yeah, the reviews are excellent of this. Okay, you can see. But anyway, have a look at the book. See what it's about. It's really interesting of what I've read. So here they ask, did the Vatican suppress the publication of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Why has there been such a delay in making them public? Do they radically call into question the Christian understanding of Jesus? These and many other issues have been raised in several recent popular books, along with charges of fraud, deceit, and cover-ups. In Jesus, Qumran, and the Vatican, two distinguished Protestant scholars, right, examined these issues and more, producing a highly readable and reliable account of the present state of the research on the scrolls and of the meaning and implications of the scrolls for Christianity. Right? So yeah, so that's something to think about. Now, Thiering's conspiracy Christianity. Now, Thiering's views, this is Thiering. She must have been Gnostic because she's looking a lot like a man. That's what I'm thinking. So Jesus must have made her a man. That's what I'm thinking when I look at this. Yeah, Jesus must have visited her and said, yeah, I'm definitely going to make you a man. So yeah, Barbara Thiering's been visited by Jesus. That's all I can say. That's what I'm. You're great. Looks right. Looks like a man. So her views go against Christian beliefs, and two, she also looks like a man. Yeah. So she says that Jesus survived the crucifixion. Jesus did not die on the cross, but was drugged and taken down alive. Okay. He was called the swoon theory. That's common. He was later revived and went on to live a long life after the crucifixion. Jesus was married and had children. She suggests that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene. You see, now this is not in the text. Understand? It's encoded in the text. It's encoded. Remember, so you need to stand upside down, smell your socks until you feel dizzy, have the sun shining in your eyes, and desperately need to take a pee, and then you'll see it. It's written in code in the text. It's not in the text. It actually doesn't. The text doesn't say it. Just like this is actually $1 million bill. It doesn't actually say it, but if you follow the process, that's $1 million. Right. So she believed that references to Jesus' family in the New Testament were symbolic of his marital status. Okay, right, fine. So yeah, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Essenes. So she linked Jesus and his teachings to the Essene community, a Jewish sect known for strict adherence to religious laws. She claimed that the Dead Sea Scrolls contained hidden messages about Jesus and his connection to the Essenes. The voices were speaking to her too. Hidden messages, the voices. So the real identity of Judas Iscariot. Thiering proposed that Judas Iscariot was not a traitor, but the good guy. Just like truth defenders or lie defender or whatever, Satan's defender that came in earlier, he believes that Hitler was the good guy. Muhammad's the good guy because they hated Jews too, just like he does. So Thiering proposed that Judas Iscariot was not a traitor, but rather a close friend and companion of Jesus, who played a key role in the crucifixion as part of a bigger plan orchestrated by Jesus himself. Yeah. Jesus faked his own death. Ask any Muslim, they'll tell you. Jesus faked his own death. Ask any Muslim. I've covered it on this channel quite literally. They do have these amazing stories about that. Okay, so that wipes, sorry, that winds down that part of this. So now the next section is Mary Magdalene and Jesus. Now look, I will come back to some of these points as we go, but now we need to move into a deeper examination of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. So I'll be touching on various points as we go, but let me do a couple of pages on this. Right. So did you know that Jesus turned the water into grape juice at the wedding at Cana? A Protestant pastor asserts wine in the Bible is just grape juice because God doesn't want us drinking alcohol. Yeah. Don't forget, Martin Luther said anyone can make up any opinion they want to the Bible for themselves, right? That was Martin Luther's view. So yeah. So Yvette R, I'm late to the party today, but I'll catch up later. Well, welcome. Okay, so we'll do 1 or 2 more pages, and I'll call it a night. Because talking the last few days, my throat, I'm still recovering. So, for the record, Jesus is God, King of Kings, and the Son of God. Everything other than that is from teaching of the fallen angels. Well said, Rotom Electric. Fair enough. It's like why no one can just stick with the gospel account as history. That's because they wouldn't want to admit truth. They wouldn't want to admit the gospel account is actually truth. And therefore, they have to make up fiction. So, yeah. So the Da Vinci Code portrays the church as an evil enemy, said to have deliberately cast Mary as a prostitute based on the idea that the church wanted to suppress the truth of Jesus and Mary being married. So the theory proposed in the Da Vinci Code is rooted in a critical interpretation of the church. In other words, a harsh, negative interpretation of the church. Welcome, it's just your boy Jay. This is basically what's called a hermeneutic of suspicion towards the church. So Jesus having a wife is at the center of the conspiracy theory in the Da Vinci Code. The central question is whether Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married. Now I've already told you I've done 2 episodes on was Jesus married to Mary Magdalene. That should be very interesting. It's actually laughably funny. Some of it's real conspiracy theory stuff. It's insane. It's actually funny. But yeah, we'll do some different analysis on the same topic today. Yeah, anyone desiring to complicate the church teaching with Gnostic theories is an enemy of God. Yes, that is 100% true. So there's a misconception that Mary Magdalene's sins were related to sexual activity, leading to the idea that she was a harlot or prostitute. This is not supported by the New Testament evidence. So, who Mary Magdalene was is at the heart of the debate presented in the Da Vinci Code. How did Mary Magdalene come to be identified as a prostitute? That's a very important question. So this session, we want to clarify who Mary Magdalene really was and examine Dunn Brown's assertions and those of related scholars. Wally Ram says, if the Gospels are true, then everyone, high or low, is subject to the same law, grace, and mercy. Yes, if the Gospel occurred as is written, then that is the truth. Therefore, everyone else has to create a fiction to deny that truth. Everyone else has to contort logic, contort reality, contort the narrative to deny that particular truth. If Jesus lived, died, and was resurrected, then he is God. God walked on earth as a man, and this is the truth that we would have to deny if, basically, as, how do I phrase that? Sorry. We would have to deny this with all of this fiction that's being created, right? To say, if that's true, then this means that Jesus is God, that this is the moral law, he exists, and there is a God. Then the atheists have to come along and make up their story. Then the Gnostics have to come along and make up their story. The modernists have to come along and make up their story. You've got the Freemasons come along and make up their story. The Muslims come along, all in service of denial of the basic truth. And the truth here is not just a metaphysical concept. It's not just a religious or theological concept. It's an actual fact of history, right? This is a fact of history. You'd have to come along and deny this history didn't happen. Hence the modernist attack on the Bible. Hence the historical critical attack on the Bible. Hence the attempt to link Jesus to everything other than simple historical fact. Now, the story in the Gospels is fact, is history. It is proven by archaeology. It is proven through evidence that is found when people go dig. It's proven by other sources, whereas Gnostic stories, those are just simply myths and fantasies. When you look at all of these other things, they're simply myths and fantasies. They're Gnostic. Whereas when I say we, I mean as people, right? We are trying to deny the truth because the truth is uncomfortable. So that's the sense that I mean that. But then again, we as Christians, we believe this story, right? We look for the evidence. But of course, there's another way that people tend to deny this. They simply attempt to deny that we, as humans, are capable of knowing what is outside of our minds, what is outside of our skin, what is outside of our senses by using things like nominalism, right? So Martin Luther was a nominalist, and they disbelieve that it is possible to interact with the outside world. You only have a purely subjective view of the world. You only have a purely personal, subjective idea of the world, which is completely different to everyone else. There's no universal categories. There is no universal knowledge. There are no universal standards. There are only relativist, subjectivist standards based on personal, small impressions of the world. And of course, this idea is what Martin Luther, that's the philosophy Martin Luther grew up in. So that's another way to try to deny reality, to try to deny truth by stating, and what is interesting, Jay Dyer said a couple of days ago, he was denying natural theology. Natural theology is basically the idea that using reason, using our minds, and this is what Martin Luther and these other philosophers who deny natural theology and who deny our ability to interact with the world, who are nominalists and so on, they state that it is not possible using reason to interact with the world, to discern from the world that God exists. Of course, the Bible does tell us that we see around us the evidence of God's creation, and therefore we can know from our minds and our senses that he does exist. These philosophies deny this. Now, Jay Dyer was saying that natural theology is false. This was a couple of days ago. I was amazed at that. Someone sent it to me, and he says, no, natural theology is false. Natural theology is using reason to determine that, yes, God exists. This is not looking into scripture, but using reason to determine that here we have evidence all around us. Now think, if God made the world, if God is implicit and present in the world, if God is in us, if God is in everything that was created, if he made everything, then the world's a reflection of God's grace. The world is a reflection of God's power. The world is a reflection of God's mind. The world's a reflection of God's character. Therefore, we should find God reflected in the world if we're utilizing our mind which is a reflection of God's character, we should then, with God's mind that we are using, right, our mind that is a reflection of his character, we should be able to discern his character in the world. And they're saying this is not possible. We can only get it from Scripture. But Scripture, you can only know it subjectively, which is, the term for that is bullshit. So, yeah, so he's denying this, which is a Gnostic view, which disturbs me. This is Gnostic. This is nominalistic. This is a denial of reality, which is for me very concerning, because that's the view Martin Luther had. Martin Luther was, I think we've determined Martin Luther was fucking crazy. So why would someone like J. Dyer second his opinion? I find that very disturbing. And if that is part and parcel of Eastern Orthodoxy, then Eastern Orthodoxy is heresy, quite bluntly. Then Eastern Orthodoxy has gone off the rails. And if that is implicit, if that is part of the fundamental substrate of Eastern Orthodoxy, then that is very disturbing. Then there are darker issues in Eastern Orthodoxy that I would be very concerned about. I've already said that I have concerns with Eastern Orthodoxy. I think there are potential problems there. And it's not something I would consider as a viable religion if I were to convert to that. No, I've already rejected it as an option because I don't think it is, it's viable. It's got issues. So yeah, those are my points. I have tried to listen to J. Dye in the past and I can't get into it. I cannot. Denying that reason can demonstrate God's reality and our duty towards him is condemned harshly. Yes, Wally Ram. So yeah, guys, sorry about that. Everyone has their own truth. Yeah, that's entirely subjective. Maybe because Mary Magdalena hung around with 11 men all the time, women should only stay with women, apparently. Silvana Leveria, what the heck are you on about? Are you sober? Seriously, I mean, really, what are you on about? I'm not following you at all. These comments of yours are like, what? Like, seriously, sober up, come back later. Okay, let's finish one or two more pages and we'll finish up here. So, now, Mary and the egg. So, Mary is sometimes depicted holding an egg in artistic representations, right? This is from an apocryphal story about Mary that became very popular, right? So, traditionally, this story became very popular, and she met Emperor Tiberius after the resurrection of Jesus. So, in the story, Tiberius doubts the truth of the resurrection and challenges Mary to prove it. So Mary holds an egg and tells Tiberius that the egg will turn red just as the resurrection is true. So the egg miraculously turns red, convincing Tiberius to believe in Jesus. This story is not biblical, of course, but is considered apocryphal. It's apocryphal is a term Martin Luther invented. Okay, so but it's basically fake news. Let's think of it as fake news. So the church historically adopted this imagery of Mary holding an egg as a symbol of the story's lesson. So let's see what we have. So Century Sin says, I didn't know the Orthodox Church. I don't know the Orthodox Church that well, but there seems too much attachment to an endless sense of mystery. Yeah, that's the mysticism. And this mysticism is, let's say, not a healthy one necessarily. There are issues. Even Protestant mysticism is violent and detached from reality. Even within the Catholic Church, there were history of mystics who were, let's say, detached from reality, and there was concern. So therefore, we must remain grounded in something, and these people are not grounded. So Gene Dennis says he denies natural reason, so it follows he lacks reason. Yes, that would be crazy. Yeah, natural theology is natural reason. That's a fair point. Okay, natural theology is not equal to Gaia. That is not natural theology. That is you're confusing paganism with the ability for reason to determine by evidence that God exists. Because if we are in the world made by God and our mind is created by God, we should be able to, from using our minds, looking at creation, at the creation, we should be able to determine God made that. There is pattern, there is structure that is clearly from God. That's the simple view. I've covered it in previous talks, natural theology. So let me see. Okay, did I miss anything? A lot of evidence shows that things have a law like structure, natural law, body absorbing things, and good bacteria. Yes, there's definitely structure and law. There is consistency. And of course, the nominalists deny consistency. They deny universals. So they claim that everything is random. When they apply it to science, it just corrupts science. It corrupts theology. So I listened to a compilation of Orthodox chants. It was too dark, like out of black metal. Yeah, so anyway, I've never heard this egg story before. Yeah, it's quite a common picture. Okay, so last slide. I think I'll do this slide. In Luke 7:37-40, a sinful woman comes to Jesus while he is dining at a Pharisee's house. The woman, referred to as a sinner, brings an alabaster flask of ointment and anoints Jesus' feet. The Pharisee questions Jesus' identity as a prophet because he allows the woman whom he considers a sinner to touch him. The Pharisees had certain views about women, and the Pharisees had certain views about purity. Jesus responds by forgiving the woman's sins and commending her faith. Now, only God can forgive sins, right, at that point. So this demonstrates his God, and of course, well, we'll get to that. The woman in the story remains unnamed, and the specific nature of her sins is not mentioned in the passage. Now, and behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping, and began to wash his feet with her tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. When the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman that is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. Okay. Sylvana says, apologies for my English. It is not my first language. I meant to say that the reason why they called her a prostitute, I don't drink alcohol, by the way. Okay, understood. Some have linked the woman caught in adultery with Mary Magdalene. I don't think I agree with that theory. So yeah, we'll try and go through some of that evidence here. Okay. Now, Jesus also tells a parable that highlights the depth of forgiveness and the woman's great love, contrasting with the lack of hospitality from the Pharisees. So here we have to ask, who can forgive sins but God? So now, this is one of the scenes where they try to say that this woman may be Mary Magdalene. That's just one of the points that they try and raise. Okay, so the woman, last slide, the woman in the passage from Luke chapter 7 is never named, leaving her identity ambiguous. There is no explicit mention of the sins that she's guilty of. In chapter 8, Jesus travels through cities and villages proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 disciples are mentioned as being with him, along with women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Among these women are Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been cast out, as well as Susanna and Joanna, right, in Luke 8, 1-3. And it came to pass afterwards that he went throughout every city and village, preaching and showing the glad tidings of the kingdom of God, and the 12 were with him. And certain women which had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, out of whom went 7 devils, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna and many others which ministered unto him of their substance. One of the interesting things is that Jesus was actually willing to have women accompany him. So this was unheard of back in the day. He was given women a status that was not something that was part and parcel of the culture of the day. He was going strongly against the culture of the day by giving these women this opportunity. So the original Greek New Testament did not have paragraph or verse divisions, and it lacked spaces between words. That's something to bear in mind. It is possible that some assume that the woman from chapter 7 and the women in chapter 8 were the same individual, but there is no indication of this in the text. So some people were saying the woman in chapter 7 washed his feet and the women in chapter 8 are the same woman. There is no indication of this in the text. So some of these would be false assumptions that have led to some of these ideas. So here I would refer you to Dr. Michael Heiser, Gnosticism and Early Christianity, to his talk on that topic. So now here's an interesting part of confusion. I'll pause here, but in the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke, there are separate accounts of a similar event where Jesus is anointed by a woman. What we've learned is that these are 2 separate incidents. In 2 of the books, they describe one woman, and in one of the books, they describe a different woman, a different event at a different time. And of course, these have been conflated to be one event, and that would be a mistake. And this leads us to some of the confusion with regards to early biblical interpretation. And of course, these stories just become entrenched in society. These stories just become the norm. And then, so we're going to try and have to see if we can sort out some of these things and determine how did they get Mary Magdalene into that story. But have a look at my story. Did Jesus marry Mary Magdalene? I talked about that story as well. I go through that in some detail. So guys, I will call it a night here. Hopefully this has been interesting. Hopefully you've learned something. And and I will see you guys after Easter. I wish you all a very, very pleasant, very blessed, very safe, very happy Easter. And I'll be back on Tuesday. I guess I'll be leaving tomorrow, and I come back on Monday afternoon. Maybe I'll do something Monday afternoon, but otherwise I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Right, so thanks all. I will see you guys again. So hopefully everyone has a wonderful, safe, blessed Easter. Jay Lugo, God bless. Yeah, so take care, everyone. Um, oh, Justy Boy just says back in the day, women weren't credited or accepted for their witness to things unless it's a man. So Jesus' way of being alive again in 3 days is highly interesting. Yeah, women are the ones who witnessed his resurrection. Women are the ones who reported. He gave them status that they didn't have in that culture at that time. But we will talk about that more. So, guys, everyone take care. And hopefully this is useful. Take all the screenshots you need to use the information, learn from it, and apply it. And I will see you guys all next time. Take care. God bless.